My name is Sheila Ford, Caldwell, Idaho. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Chairman Skog and the members of the committee. Many things that I was going to say have already been said, so I will just say that Article 5 does not establish rules for the convention, and Congress might claim that power, which Article 5 does not deny to them. And Article 5 says that Congress will call a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. It does not confine it to one topic or limit the number of potential topics. One of the topics that is in the bill that you're considering says limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Well, Article 1, Section 8 does that, and they're ignoring it. And the convention, having concluded, will not cause Congress, which has been ignoring its limits defined in Article 1, Section 8, to magically begin to honor those limits. And are there any questions?
All right. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Larry Craig. Is Larry Craig here? Welcome, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, first and foremost, let me thank you all for your service and your willingness to dive into an issue that is, by the testimony today and by past history of the issue, contentious, but critically and necessarily very important. Article 5 does something for state legislators that few recognize. It gives you the power to control the federal government's spending or other areas of the federal government as you may choose to place in a concurrent resolution. It's a phenomenally unique power. I had the privilege of serving here in the Senate from 1974 on, and during that time, a fellow by the name of Dave Little, Governor Little's father, was my seatmate in the Senate. He elbowed me one day and said, "Hey, Craig, let's go over to the Oahe Hotel and listen to Governor Reagan. He's coming through town, and he may well become our next president, or at least it's being talked about." We went, I listened, and Governor Reagan at that time said something I'd never thought about, frankly didn't know about. He talked about Article 5 and the importance of putting a
Reagan did
balanced
a
budget
really good
amendment
job.
in the
He really
Constitution.
did.
Well, I came home and studied.
IBM was taken
And in
over
1979, the Idaho Legislature
when he,
did exactly what
made
you're
the
considering doing
pension
today.
funds
I took
owned
that
by
issue.
the Board of
I ran
Directors
with it.
rather
The
than
U.S.
the employer.
Congress served there.
$8
helped
trillion
form groups.
of the
I
pension
traveled
funds
with the president
disappeared.
and others at the time
Larry
advocating this,
Craig, member
and
of
we
the
almost got there. It was
the Board of Directors of the
1994, and my colleague Rick Santorum was in the House,
National Rifle
ready to come over to the
Association.
Senate. It was an issue called Contract
And
with
this is a
America.
guy that
And we got Newt Gingrich to put it in.
was
And it
embarrassed
passed the
by
two-thirds vote in the House.
tap
It went to
dancing
the
in
Senate. I helped carry the debate there. We
Minneapolis
lost by one
bathroom.
vote. The reason I talk
the
to you
longest
about
running,
this is that there will
US
probably
senator.
never be a convention.
But here again,
There are 33
a member
amendments sent out by the U.S.
of the,
Congress for states to
the
consider
Board
and
of Directors
ratify.
of the NRA, and I got
Only
a death
27
threat
were.
from
So
the
states
NRA.
take that job very
And this
seriously.
guy is,
We've heard
is
today
part
about a
of that
runaway
death threat.
convention. Listen, we
Where,
all know that conventions only do
Well,
one
Oliver
thing.
North, he
They
was at the
propose
convention in 2018
amendments
in
to the
Pocatello,
Constitution.
the Republican
It's
National
three-fourths of
State
the states
Convention.
of our nation that ratify.
And Oliver North said, "I want to remind
convention
all
would
you
do if it were to happen,
Republicans
and I
that
don't
we
believe it
deliver
will.
6% of the
Because
vote."
I believe Congress will issue an
And here we
amendment.
got all these
long before
mass shootings, 600 school
A
shootings a
convention
year.
ever gets there.
And this guy
That's
is
what
one of
our
the
goal
reasons
was
why.
in the 90s. That's what President Reagan's goal was in the
I'm really
80s and the
tired
90s.
of
In fact, he
the
said so and
NRA,
said it very clearly.
especially when they say they're
Let
going
us
to take my
push the
effing family
Congress
out in the middle of
to
the
the
street and
point
hang
of
us.
offering
And I think that's
an amendment
pretty,
to come forward. And that's what
that
they
just
did.
went over the top with
That's
me.
what we're asking you to do now.
Yeah, you sound good,
take on
sir.
your job, your constitutional
Yeah,
responsibility.
constitutional
Send
responsibility.
to the Congress
and
of the
why
United
you're behind
States
I have
mine.
to wrap up, Senator.
House Concurrent Resolution 10.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
yeah,
I remember
goodbye.
you
Don't let the
talking
door
about
hit you
this
on
in
the butt on the way out.
1993 at the Nampa Lions Club. You are consistent.
Well, and the reason I'm consistent, Mr. Chairman, is quite simple. When we debated it in 1979, the federal debt was $600 billion. When we were debating it in Congress in 1994, the federal deficit was $4.2 trillion. Now that's about 60% of the GDP. We know what it is today. Everybody's talking about it. It's 36 trillion, and that's 123% of the gross domestic product of this country. So yes, it's worth talking about and fixating on just a little bit.
All right. I have a question for you from Representative
Have,
Ehart.
have you ever heard of, sir, when it comes to the debt, when you cut taxes,
Mr. Chairman,
the revenue
Senator Craig,
from
it's an honor to have you
39% in
here.
corporate taxes
We've
down
all
to
known about you
21%.
and followed you
That's
for many, many
lost
years.
revenue. And that's what Trump
Someone
did.
answered one of my
And,
questions by
in
detailing the
January of
history of our
2018.
deficits.
So,
It
you know, I
makes you
get tired
wonder
of this
why the
baloney.
framers
You
didn't
know,
do
Trump,
anything about
Trump
that when
increased the
they
national
adopted
debt by
the Constitution
$7.8
initially, but they didn't.
trillion.
They
And
didn't
these
do
guys
that.
aren't
That's
talking
correct.
about it.
But you also said something that I just want to
Good grief.
reemphasize. Is there any way, if a convention is held, that any amendment to the Constitution, as proposed, can be adopted without 3/4 of the states approving it?
No,
Senator, through the chair.
the answer is no.
Thank you.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for coming.
Vice Chair.
You talked about perhaps one of the goals of this Article 5 convention is to force action by the federal government, force action by the Congress. Is there an example where that's actually happened?
Well, as has been said, since the original Constitutional Convention, there has been no other. There have been thousands of amendments proposed. There have been a variety of conventions proposed. None of them came to pass. But the Congress has sent forth 33 amendments to states for ratification that were in part a product of pressure from the states. The idea of of Amendment 17, the popular election of senators. Well, senators were once appointed by state legislatures, and it became at least obvious to the public that they felt the senators appointed were products of smoke-filled rooms, that they ought to be openly elected by the people of the country. That amendment, that pressure built, finally Congress, and of course senators didn't want to do that, sent forth an amendment for ratification. So yes, it has happened, but no convention has been convened.
Representative Heather Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Bruce Skog. Senator Craig, I'm curious, you talked about power in the states, and I don't see that in the language of the actual amendment. So can you explain what you're talking about, taking back power in the states?
Article 5 is relatively short, and it speaks of two methods by which to amend the Constitution. And the one of them is the one we're debating today, the process of a concurrent resolution, or the state legislatures approaching that for a constitutional convention purpose. And as I say, in all instances where that pressure has built, the Congress has issued an amendment of the topic at hand for states to consider for ratification. What our founding fathers wanted to do, and did it very successfully, and we see it over the history of our country, they wanted to make it very difficult to change the Constitution, but they recognized the potential of a federal government getting out of control. Now remember, we're a republic. We're not a democracy. And so our states at that time were all powerful in the formation of our central government. And they wanted to make sure that the states
I sure am
retained
glad
some
he's
of that
no
power
longer
as
Idaho's
to the
U.S.
creation of the
senator.
balance for the change of the
It was a
Constitution
blessing.
when and if necessary.
When he did
Some
that
say,
tap
well, it's a
dance in the
sacred document
Minneapolis
crafted never to be touched. Well, it's
airport.
been touched a lot.
Cost
It
the
couldn't even
ship.
arrive at first ratification until 10 amendments were proposed.
Rich,
And since that time,
they were
now
all
we're up to
worried that he was
27.
gonna,
So you see,
he
it
was
has
gonna
changed. It is
resign.
dynamic.
Well, they
It
convinced
can be
him not
allowed
to,
to
so that
be
gave Otter time
when
to come
necessary
back
and when a majority of our
replace
states,
Risch
a supermajority,
as,
agree that that ought to be
Idaho's
the
governor,
case.
and then Risch went on to take
Follow up?
Craig's place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's all,
Senator Craig.
you know,
So
this-
you've been around a
I
long
remember
time,
Frank
it sounds
Church,
like.
and he
So
was a statesman.
Well, I
have a
don't like
question.
to be reminded of that, but yes.
Senator, to keep order,
Yeah,
speak through the
just,
chair.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
This,
Chairman. Senator
John
Craig.
Birch Society,
So
you know,
my
I want to
question
remind
is,
you that we are a republic.
you've probably watched
that's
over the
coming out
last
of the
month, as we
Koch,
all have,
Charles
the
Koch,
new administration rooting
the
out corruption
neoliberalism.
in our country, and I think there's going to be some huge changes coming. Does
Yeah.
it make you nervous at all, the timing of this now in where we are? I'd say the ship is turning and progress is happening every second, it seems like. And so I'm just curious if you see any conflict with the timing of this and what we have happening at the national level with corruption being exposed and, using, just, I guess
Sure.
you could touch on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Scott, the answer quite simply is no. I think the target of DOGE is to gain somewhere near a couple of $1 trillion of reduction in expenditure. And of course, we're hearing about corruption in aid, USAID, and other places. It isn't just corruption. There is a potentially significant corruption in a variety of programs where spending has become so great that nobody can effectively monitor it. Medicare, Medicaid is an example, and yet they're pretty sacred. They're viewed as quite valuable. It's possible that they can gain their $2 trillion or $1.5 trillion. The last budget passed, the concurrent resolution passed by this Congress, had a $2 trillion deficit built into it. If you voted for it, you were voting for a $2 trillion deficit. In other words, to add $2 trillion to the national budget. Now, as a legislator, if you came to town knowing you were going to vote for a budget that had hundreds of millions of dollars of deficit in it, would you do that? Well, you couldn't do it here, because you have to at least attempt, based on projected revenue, to balance the budget. It's your call. It's your requirement to serve.
This guy's Craig. He's repeating the same thing that Senator Crapo says. The problem is spending, not the tax revenue. And we spent, the largest part of the budget is for defense,
Really appreciate
nearly
it.
$1 trillion.
Talk to me about
Plus the veterans, and now,
runaway convention.
yeah.
I've had
Here we go. Let's hear what this guy says.
that I represent have brought this issue to me, and I know they're your people too, because you used to represent the same area that I represent now. Is that a worry for you, and if so, why not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schertz, no. And it's quite simply and very loudly no. There are 6 major safety steps in the formalization, the convening, and the ratification process that would produce a convention and the delegates and any proposed amendment that might come from it. As I said earlier, conventions can only propose. They cannot ratify an amendment. That's your responsibility. If the convention were to bring forth 2 or 3 amendments and send them out, they would come here. The Congress will first instruct and shape the convention. You have the privilege, through Resolution 9, concurrent Resolution 9, of shaping the method by which you send the commissioners or the delegates to the convention. And that can be very clear and very direct, and you can monitor that. In fact, I think it's Wyoming said that it's a felony to violate the charge and the responsibility that you would be given as a delegate. Remember, this is a legislative process. It's not a governor. It's not a president. It's the Congress and state legislators that have the right and responsibility under the Constitution to change the Constitution. So I don't worry about it, because the last and most valuable part is the ratification. Can you imagine a national debate where every state legislature dug into a federal budget and looked at it and decided that they ought to ratify and force a balance? I mean, that's a phenomenally valuable debate for our nation to go through, as it might be term limits or any of those other issues that would come up. I personally don't favor a convention. I don't think one's necessary, because I think we can force the Congress to do what we attempted to do and nearly did in 1994. But at the same time, I don't fear it. From the time Ronald Reagan left office until we took away our call to convention, there were a variety of organizations in the nation that worked at bringing down those calls, because we were up to 32 and ready for the 33rd state. In fact, it was Montana that we believed might come in at that time, which would have got us to the 34 necessary to tip it over and to cause the Congress to move. But we were able to cause that to happen prior to that. So no, I do not fear it. I frankly think it is a smokescreen, in my blunt opinion, for the simple reason, Mr. Chairman, we return to you and we turn to the legislature to say, debate it, look at it, and decide whether you want this in your Constitution or you don't. That's a phenomenally valuable safety check.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, thank you.
Senator Santorum, followed by Julianne Young. When you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman Skog, Vice Chairman Alfieri, and the committee. What I'd like to do is just give you a little practical experience. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I have served, not as long as Larry did, but I served in Washington for a long time. And I can tell you, Washington is not going to fix itself. All of the people who've talked about different things that could happen, that could change things, and I know Representative Scott points out that Donald Trump and Doge are doing a lot of things. A lot of them will be done, a lot of them won't be done. And 4 years from now, all those things could be wiped out, just like Donald Trump has wiped out everything Joe Biden has put in place. The bottom line is, the way I like to put it is, the house is on fire. Does anybody think that this country is not headed to a financial collapse? Does anybody not believe that? Raise your hand if you don't think. If you don't think we're headed to a financial collapse, raise your hand. We are. The house is on fire. You can sit here and say, well, maybe it'd be risky. What's risky about putting a house that's on fire out? You may be across the street looking at the house and you say, well, it's dangerous to cross the street. There are no cars on the street that I see. But if my house is on fire, I'm going to cross the street. The reality is this country needs what the founders put you folks there to do. Check the power of Washington, in the case of the federal government. That's what you're there to do. And they put two checks in there. One, you folks used to appoint United States senators. You gave that power up in 1912. And as a result, from 1912, by the way, the only debt of the federal government in 1912 was $1.50 from the Spanish-American War. And ever since then, it has exploded. Why? Because you took the check away. Senators that you appointed didn't let power grow in Washington, D.C., because you were holding their feet to the fire. That changed, and Washington changed. People say people are not, they're not living up to the Constitution as it is. That's just not true. Yeah, they're not living up to this Constitution, but that isn't the Constitution we live under. You want the Constitution we live under? Order one from the General Printing Office. It's 2,600 pages. You say, well, that's not the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the Constitution. That's the reality. People don't want to live in reality. Let me tell you about reality. The reality, those are amendments to the Constitution plus Supreme Court cases that have exploded the power of the federal government. People say, don't touch the Constitution. The Constitution has been touched and trampled, not ignored. President Trump is doing things. He's going to get a constitutional test as to whether the court's going to say you can do that or not. It happens all the time. Congress passes law. They're subject to constitutional scrutiny. But the court is the one who looks at the amendments, looks at the Constitution itself, and then determines whether it is a legitimate exercise of power. You put new amendments in, you change that dynamic. I'm here. I live outside of Washington. If I wanted to, I could spend, I comment on television. I've run for president. I've been a senator. If I thought that I could fix the problem in Washington, I wouldn't be in Boise. Not that I don't love Boise. I love Boise, but I wouldn't be here. The only reason I'm here is because you are the only ones that can fix this problem. And the founders believed in you, and so do I.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions of the Senator? Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Chairman Skog. Senator Santorum, just one quick question. What if we go through this whole process and we get all the states that we need to start an Article 5 convention and nothing happens?
I hate to say that, but that's probably the
Chairman.
most likely result.
Senator.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm
Slow
sorry.
down.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
you.
Yes,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the question. But I, as I said, I think it's the most likely result. Why? Because getting 38 states to ratify anything, it's the hardest thing to do in this country. Just, there's no other bar as high as amending the Constitution. No state government, no local, no government anywhere has that bar. Do you look at the 27 amendments that passed? 10 were at the founding. So let's look at the 17 that passed since the founding. All of them were 80+% issues. Why? Because you need 75% of the states. You're not going to have anything that's controversial, left or right, have any chance. And if you're going to a convention, you are the folks who are going to be picked. It'll be state legislators. If you're going there, are you going to propose amendments that have no chance of passing? Of course you're not. You're there to be constructive. You have the responsibility to use, the first time in our country's history, to use the power that the founders gave you. These founders who some people call tyrants, I don't. I think they were amazing. And I think, by the way, they did follow their commissions. You, for the first time, are you going to go rogue? Of course not. This is a sacred trust. It's a sacred trust that your state is giving you, and you're going to go there just like, I can't even imagine. It would be the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And you would go there to do what? You would go there to try to help the country. The fact that people sit around and say, oh, these people can't be trusted with anything. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't trust institutions in our country, we are doomed. If you aren't willing to trust yourselves, we're doomed. I trust you.
Any questions? Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Santorum, welcome.
Thank you.
You absolutely give passionate testimony. Let me ask something that I think is in your wheelhouse, given your past, and I think you were very vocal about it, and it's a concern that some of us have, and it's something I'll probably address. I think we'd all agree our founders were pretty spiritual men. I think you're a spiritual man. There's a concern about the spirituality. I'm going to give you a chance, if you would, to address that. I don't think that's a concern where we'd be.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Ehart. If you read, and I have, many of the biographies of the founders, they were spiritual men, but they were sinners. They were every bit the sinner as anybody in this room. Everybody talks about them as sort of marble statues. These are broken men in many respects. Hamilton was shot in a duel. I mean, these are not saints. They were good men who, I always talk about the greatest generation. Why were they the greatest generation? Do you think people in the greatest generation had better values and morals than the generation before them or after them? I would say no, generally speaking. Why were they great? Because they met the challenge of their day. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Meet the challenge of your day. I don't think anybody questions that what's going on in Washington. Look at all the clamor for just the few. Senator Craig is right. I mean, they're talking about minor changes in spending here, and the place is going crazy. Meet the challenge of your day. Restore checks and balances to the federal government. Restore it. And do I believe that people who will go to that convention may not be as spiritual as folks before? Yes, but here's one of the brilliant things the founders did, Representative, and that is they put a provision in there where actually we want the delegates, you, who are going to be appointed from the states, the founders wanted you to be self-interested. They actually wanted you to grab power. So I would just say that the folks who are going to be appointed there, the more power they grab back to the states, in other words, the more they enhance their own power, I'm all for it. So in a sense, they set it up to understand the frailties of men and women and actually are exploiting them to try to limit the power of the federal government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity.
Julianne Young. And I'm having trouble with my timer on the last couple people, so I'm going to have Nancy time, and she'll wave at you shortly before the 3 minutes are up.
Okay, before I start, Mr. Chairman, can I make sure that the committee sees these two items that are in your folders?
Yes, I think they're in the folders. Go ahead and get those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Julianne Young. I'm from Blackfoot, and I represent myself. I fell hopelessly in love with the United States Constitution years ago, and I've never gotten over it. Today, you've heard a lot of appeals to authority. I want you to notice from the handout that's in your folder there are authorities on both sides of this issue. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the only authority that matters is Article 5 of the Constitution itself. And I suspect that no one in favor of a convention has actually gone over Article 5 with you, nor have they shared with you the congressional research reports that were mentioned earlier, nor have they shared with you the legislation, dozens of pieces of legislation that have been introduced in Congress outlining how a convention would happen, because they know that if you looked at those original sources, you would have questions. If you read Article 5 closely, you would notice that it actually empowers Congress. Congress is the subject of Article 5, empowered to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution or to call a convention to propose amendments. Under the Constitution, Congress has all powers necessary and proper to call that convention, including defining the delegates, how they will be chosen, and how their representation will be apportioned. There is no guarantee, despite all that you've been told today, that state legislatures will have any say in who those delegates are. And the historic trajectory of congressional proposals, of which there have been dozens, is to propose proportional representation, not one state, one vote guaranteed, as you are told. Congressional powers include the responsibility to fund the convention according to them. If power follows money, as we frequently say, that should tell us everything that we need to know. Under Article 5, Congress might send proposed amendments to state legislatures for ratification, or they may choose ratification by conventions in states, which conventions must necessarily be organized as determined by Congress. While Congress is the primary subject empowered throughout Article 5, the states get two brief nods. Our applications trigger the calling of the convention, hardly a power position. And we might get to ratify amendments if Congress chooses to. You are being told today that you can provide delegate instructions. Idaho has no legal authority to instruct or even select delegates, not under the U.S. Constitution and not under the Idaho Constitution. To pretend to this authority is disingenuous on our part. The actual delegates may owe their positions to Congress or to the voters in a special election, and not to state legislatures. The Constitution authorizes the convention to propose amendments. Under the Supremacy Clause, Any state law which contradicts the Constitution is void. Ultimately, state law cannot control delegates to a convention because a convention is the highest authority in our republic. It emanates directly from the people. And if delegates chose to meet in secret, as they did in 1787, we wouldn't even know what they were doing. If someone came to this committee with a financial proposal making promises that they had no authority to make or to
Young, you'll have
enforce,
to wrap up now.
and which directly contradicted the plain terms of the contract, I would expect you to vote no. Our Constitution is infinitely more valuable than a few taxpayer dollars.
Are there questions of the testifier? Representative Yehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Young, it's good to have you back. Your presence has been missed. We've spoken a little bit about this. Would you mind addressing, can an amendment be adopted without ratification by the states?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ehart. It can. Article 5 is plain. Congress may choose between two methods of ratification. There is no guarantee that state legislatures will ratify whatever comes out. I provided you with a handout with the plain language of Article 5, which you can see for yourself. And I think it's also instructive to notice when you read the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, they chose to have the people of the states vote to ratify our first Constitution rather than returning it to state legislatures. There's precedent for this. There's only one time in the history of our nation where an amendment has been ratified by conventions and state legislatures, and that was the repeal of prohibition. Congress selected ratification by conventions in the states because they needed a vote or two from the western states, which were some of the driest, most anti-liquor states in the country. And so they selected ratification by conventions. And the repeal of prohibition was ultimately repealed upon the final vote of the state of Utah, which was one of the driest, most anti-liquor states in the country. And that was a unanimous vote on the part of the convention. We are being told today that we will have a primary role because it makes us feel good. But we do not play a prominent role in Article 5. The things that you are being told cannot be guaranteed, and they cannot be found in the plain text of Article 5. If you have any doubts or any questions about this, I urge you to vote no on these pieces of legislation. Thank you.
Doesn't match their sex organs with their heart and their brain.
Representative Young, I have one question. We
Oh,
have
my goodness.
HCR 9
Lots of
and
screwballs.
HCR 10. And HCR 9, should that pass, it has pretty tight restrictions, it reads. Doesn't that make you a little more comfortable if HCR 10 passes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great question. I was talking probably too fast when I gave my testimony. But one of the things that I think is important is that if Congress calls this convention, they must say who the eligible delegates will be. There's been discussion about this, and if you look at the congressional research reports and other things, you'll see that there's a possibility that the governors select delegates. There's a possibility that they could be judges. There's also a possibility, there's been discussion about whether members of Congress themselves could serve as delegates. And the Bar Association reached the conclusion that that was a possibility because we had members of the Congress under the Articles of Confederation who served as delegates in the first Constitutional Convention. We don't know how those delegates will be selected. What we do know is that Congress is authorized under Article 5 to call the convention, and they are the only ones that could possibly have the authority to say how that will happen. With that, we cannot guarantee that we will have any role or that this legislation, which is before us, will be effectual in any way.
Representative Rubel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Young. I was wondering if you could flesh out a little bit, because I know I've heard for many years that this would be rock solid and enforceable. What are concerns around that whatever we pass in order to control delegates, if there was to be such a convention, would be superseded by federal law or would otherwise be unenforceable, whatever constraints we sought to put on those delegates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Rubel. The only authority I see in the law is the statement in Article 5 that Congress calls the convention. That tells me that Congress decides who selects the delegates and how that process works. So should Congress choose not to have state legislatures select the delegates, we'll have absolutely no say in it. It's like Idaho writing a statute to tell Arizona how they're going to run their education system. It's not in our wheelhouse. It's not our delegated power. We have a government of written, separated powers for a reason. And if it's outside of our jurisdiction, we have no say.
Representative Hill.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Young, nice to meet you for the first time. My brother speaks highly of you. Did I understand you to say that if Congress takes the step of proposing an amendment, it doesn't require three-fourths ratification by 3/4 of the states? Did you say that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Hill. What I said is, if you look at the plain language of Article 5, and I did provide it for you on that handout at the top, Congress may choose one or the other mode of ratification, and the two modes are listed in Article 5. The first is ratification by 3/4 of the states. The second option is ratification by conventions in 3/4 of the states, as Congress may choose one method or the other.
But it requires 3/4 of the states to approve an amendment no matter what. I've got the language in front of me. I'm a lawyer, maybe not the best one in this room, but I am a lawyer. And first of all, when you say Congress can do it, let's be clear. It says the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses deem it necessary, that's 2/3 of the House and the Senate, shall propose amendments to the Constitution or, not and, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention. So those are the two paths. But no matter what, at the end of the day, no amendment to the Constitution gets made without ratification by 3/4 of the states. I think that's 38.
Hill's a lawyer.
I don't see it
That
read any other
explains a
way.
lot of things.
That's
you
a
know.
question. Put a question mark at the end of that.
Very good.
Thank
This
you,
is a red
Mr.
herring.
Chairman and Representative Hill. I
This is
understand your
baloney.
question.
It's a waste of time.
And the
Look at
answer
the time.
is, my answer was not
costs
that 3/4 of the
$70,000
states
a
would not
day.
have to ratify it,
And they've
but
been
simply
talking
that
all
there
day
are
on
two
this thing.
options. And we are assuming in all of our conversation here that it's 3/4 of the state legislatures. It's not necessarily 3/4 of the state
$70,000
legislatures.
a day for
It
the
may also
legislature to be
be
there.
conventions in 3/4
This
of the
is
states.
nonsense.
And those conventions must necessarily be whatever Congress says an authorized convention can be, which is what happened when we had the repeal of prohibition.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood. I'm sorry. Never mind.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Representative Young. Last to testify, and I apologize deeply to my friends who are going to harangue me, Ryan, after this because I didn't get you called. We can't get everyone. So last is Constantine Curard, and I may have butchered your last name. I apologize.
Very well, thank you.
Introduce yourself and tell us what you know.
Yes, please. It's hang this up here briefly. It's thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. It's Constantine Curard. I'm here on behalf of U.S. Term Limits. I'm the Western Regional Director, and basically standing here on behalf of the more than 1.5 million Idahoans who support term limits on Congress. I had prepared remarks, and then after that last speaker, I kind of tossed them and said, "Okay, you guys have heard enough about this. I just want to make sure we have some clarity before you guys proceed to any votes." Plus, I would point out that nobody that testified today actually spoke against a balanced budget amendment or against term limits for Congress. This entire room seems unanimous that we should have both. And for those of you who understand the process, this is the only way to get either of them. This is the only way to get both of them. Congress will likely propose these amendments, but not until the states make them, because it's not in Congress's interests to put limits on themselves or how they spend money. But when the states apply the pressure, Congress will do what Congress has always done, and that is bend the knee to the states when forced to. And so this is the process. It is, I always liken it to people who say, well, I believe in a long, healthy life. I'm just fundamentally opposed to diet and exercise. The bad news is there's only one way to get there. And since we all agree on the goal, we really do need to find consensus on how quickly we can take the only path that applies. Just quickly, and I'm kind of doing this without the notes now. The states are supreme in this process. Congress's role is minimal. Yes, please read Article 5 because Congress's role is extremely limited. If the states make a call, Congress's role is largely ministerial, and that is to set the time, date, and place on the call, include the subject matter, which is they say, okay, I've got 34 calls here for whatever, a balanced budget amendment, term limits, a convention of states, whatever it is. So you all are to send your delegations to Independence Hall in Philadelphia at noon on July 4th for the purpose of debating these amendments. And Congress is done for now. Now the process goes back to the states. Who are you? You're supreme. You are the people. You set the delegates. You decide how they are sent. You put whatever limitations you wish to on them. This is how it has always been done. It's not a question of, well, we don't know because of course we had. There were numerous conventions, and there's never been any question that it's one state, one vote, how the delegates are selected, who gets to pick the delegates. The states rule, Idaho decides for Idaho. You decide how many delegates you send. I recommend an odd number because they're going to be voting on your state's position, and if you send 6, you don't want a 3-3 tie. But those are all questions that the states get to decide. It's not until the convention has completed its work and sent back to Congress whatever work product you've generated that Congress is once again in the process. And even then, it is only to decide the method of ratification, which, as Representative Hill, the shadow representative, so active, it is still 3/4 of the states that must ratify. Congress has always instructed the legislatures to ratify amendments, except for the repeal of prohibition, because there was largely a fear that there were some states where folks who wanted to kind of keep the U.S. dry were so strong in the state houses, they didn't think they'd be able to get it through, and so they went to the state. But the state conventions are operated by the legislatures. You determine how your state convention operates. Again, this is not something where Congress gets to impose. Congress has an extremely limited role here because the founders, when they wrote Article 5, said Congress proposes and the states ratify. And before they left, they said, but what if Congress is the problem? Congress will never rein itself in. So the states were given the power to propose as well. So you guys are in charge. You have the power. Please do read Article 5. I'll stand for any questions because there was a lot of smoke. So we'll try to clear what we can.
My apologies. I forgot to watch the clock. I don't know if you went 5 minutes over or 10 seconds, but
10 seconds, sir.
All right, Representative Schertz. Thank you for your vote, Representative Schertz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Curard, appreciate you coming and testifying for us. I had a question about the 1787 convention that we heard was a runaway convention. Do you have much historical account of what actually took place?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question because there's usually, when you have 2 minutes to tell a story and someone has 2 minutes to say 10 alarmist things, you don't get a chance to respond to all of them properly. 1787, again, the idea is that, well, they were sent for one purpose and they did another purpose. And historically, that's not accurate. In 1786, I believe, the Annapolis Convention recommended basically a fresh constitution. Of the 13 states, 7 immediately commissioned delegates for the purpose of basically a new document that would be sufficient to the needs of this new nation. Congress, after those 7 states, decided to opine and sent a letter to the states recommending that the convention be limited in scope. And so people will say, well, it was supposed to be a limited convention and they ignored that. No, they ignored Congress because Congress has no role in these. These are state-run processes. So after Congress, the original actual recommendation from Congress was supposed to be fairly broad. The delegation from New York, a congressman specifically, an anti-federalist, objected to that and said, no, it should be restricted. So Congress kind of said, well, would you mind restricting it? Even the letter from Congress to the states indicated that it was an opinion letter. It was a request. They had no authority in the matter. Of the 6 states that were left, 3 also gave their delegates full. Georgia, I've got the Georgia one. Their delegates were allowed to and all such alterations and further provisions as may be necessary to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of the union. Like, do whatever you have to do. That was the kind of direction that most of them received. One of them, I think it was Delaware, had limited. Two of them basically one state did not show, two had limited. There were 55 delegates at that convention. 48 of the 55 had the authority to basically rewrite the whole thing. Of the 7 who did not, 1 went home for a sick wife. 3 chose not to sign because they were following their instructions. 3 of them, 2 maybe from New York, or Hamilton, I think, was a New Yorker who did it in his personal capacity, which is probably a loophole that didn't exist. So of the 55, technically 3 were operating outside their instructions. 52 of them were following their instructions. And that is not a runaway by any historical measure.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Curard, my question is, we talk about the spending problem in the federal government, and we say we don't have any power to stop that, but we do have the 10th Amendment that all of our states seem to ignore, that the federal government's outside of its boundaries or delegated powers in education and healthcare and all that, because we accept this federal money. And so if we can't get together on that fact alone, that the federal government is outside of its delegated authority, what makes you think that we're going to get our act together to rein in spending?
Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Representative Scott, the balanced budget amendment pushes already at 27 states, so you're almost done. So that one alone tells you that legislatures around this country are very serious. I'd also suggest that when you're adding $1 trillion every 170 days, the problem gets more and more urgent all the time. We're over $1 trillion in interest-only payments. And that's because our interest rates are very, very low. This year, the federal government's going to refinance 1/4 of our debt. We're going out and refinancing $9 trillion this calendar year. So the blended interest rate on what we pay, you're going to come back in 4 or 5 years, you'll be paying upwards of $2 trillion a year. So I believe the states are finding their voice in that matter. But it is also a question of, in essence, putting up guardrails against temptation. If there's ice cream in the freezer, I'm going to eat it. But if I could make a deal with my wife not to buy ice cream, that kind of protects me. So if you place the guardrails around Congress and say you have to be responsible, that obviously will carry down to the states.
Quick follow-up.
One follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Curard, so I still don't, like, right now the states are ignoring the federal Constitution. It's not the federal government. They're getting away with what they can because we're ignoring the states by accepting that federal money for things that are outside the boundaries of the federal government. So back to my original question, I still just don't understand how you think that we're going to come together as states that have already been ignoring, all these states have been ignoring the federal government, and now all of a sudden we're going to get on the same page, or ignoring the Constitution, and now we're all going to get on the same page and say we want you to follow it, even though we're the ones violating it by accepting the money?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Scott, I agree, and I would love for states to kind of get their act together on a whole host of issues where I would love for them to be stronger and remember their constitutional authority and their role. And there's nullification. There's all sorts of things that states could be doing, including saying no, which is very, very difficult. But I don't know that the state's failure to do those things means we should decide in advance to also fail on this just because we're failing. No, we have the opportunity here to do something that is very necessary, and there's a very limited time to do it. And so to the degree that you recognize where states are tempted to do the things that they should not be doing, and you have the ability to remove the temptation, almost as a parent to a child, I would implore you to please remove the temptation, recognizing that a child will behave like a child. And perhaps a state government that's offered phenomenal sums of money for, in exchange for authority it should not be giving up, we'll be tempted in a way that we understand it'll be tempted, and so let's remove the temptation. But that's philosophical. The good news is that the process is there. The founders gave this to you specifically, so if Congress was out of control, you, the states, could stop them. And you know this is a problem that Congress will not resolve on its own, regardless of the administration, regardless of the efforts. It's a runaway. And the inflationary pressures on the interest rates, which drive up the interest payments on the debt, which drives the deficit, which forces you to print money, which drives the inflationary pressures, you are now on this part of the curve. And time is running out.
Hey, seeing no further questions, I want you to know your food analogies were highly too personal to me.
Appreciate it.
That concludes our testimony. Representative Redmond, come forward when you're ready. I want the committee and audience to know that we had a number of people signed up. There were a handful we didn't get to, but there were 10 of each side of the issue that testified. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I also want to thank everyone that testified on both sides of the issue. I think it was a fascinating debate, obviously a very passionate subject. I think if we polled all the folks that testified, we gave them 100 different issues, we'd probably agree on 95 of them. On this one, where there's definitely some opposition, but I think we all agree on the problem. We probably disagree on how to solve that problem. For context, each three calls we have in here, the balanced budget amendment, currently there's 27 states with that. Term limits 9, and convention of states there's 19. I have to agree with Senator Craig in that I think as we get more momentum towards this issue, I do believe that Congress will act, because I don't think they want to have a convention called. Our founders intended for Article 5 in the Constitution. They put it in there, and I believe that it was inspired by God. I believe they gave us these tools, and as Senator Santorum said, the House is on fire. We need to act. Good committee, I ask that you use our authority as sovereign states and send HCR 9 and 10 to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Thank you, Representative. Are there questions of the presenter? Representative Alfieri?
For a motion, sir.
Okay, motion is always in order.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we send HCR 9 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Any discussion on the motion? Representative Rubel.
For a substitute motion, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I moved that, sorry, was it just the one bill?
Yes.
HCR. I would bring a motion that we instead hold it in committee.
So there is a substitute motion to hold HCR 9 in committee, correct? All right. Further discussion, Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just addressing 9. Little frustrated with 9, purporting to already come up with the plan beforehand that we would have to follow if the Article 5 passes. I think is putting the cart before the horse, and I also am discouraged by some of the language in there, some limitations. I probably should have asked it was my fault. I should have asked the good representative who it was that who had written this, from where did it originate?
It came from
But
ALEC.
just on 9 alone, which Mr. Chairman, I
Legislative
originally
Exchange
wanted to
Council.
reverse the order, go directly to 10, because if 10 didn't pass,
Funded
then
by
9 would matter.
Charles Koch.
If 10 did pass, then I would like to have a say in 9.
A billionaire.
So I myself, I guess I'll vote to hold it, but I'm happy just on 9 to vote against it.
Thank you. Any
And
further
go to
discussion?
each state legislature and put these bills in.
Seeing
All
no
50
red
states.
lights, properly before the committee.
Roll call.
Yes, roll call vote will be taken. Good call. On both of these, without any further request, it will be roll call votes. Representative Garner.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just knew that we needed our...
Oh. Attaché Nancy appreciates you very much. All right, so properly before the committee is HCR number 9 to be held in committee. So a yes vote means that you hold 9 in committee. A no vote means it moves forward to the next motion.
Waste of money to pull these things together. That's where the ALEC and Charles Koch.
Chairman Skog?
No.
Vice Chair Alfieri?
No.
Representative Scott?
Yes.
Representative Ehart?
Yes.
Representative Erickson?
No.
Representative Garner?
No.
Representative Handy?
No.
Representative Hawkins?
Yes.
Representative Hill?
No.
Representative Hostetler?
Yes.
Representative Pohanka?
No. No.
Representative Schertz?
No.
Representative Gannon?
Yes.
Representative Mathias?
No.
Representative Rubel?
Yes.
What's wrong with Mathias?
Motion fails 9-6. Now we'll proceed to the original motion, which is to send HCR 9 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Oh my goodness.
Roll call.
Chairman Skog?
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri?
Yes.
Representative Scott?
No.
Representative Ehart?
No.
Representative Erickson?
Yes.
Representative Garner?
Yes.
Representative Handy?
Yes.
Representative Hawkins?
No.
Representative Hill?
Yes.
Representative Hostetler?
No.
Representative Pohanka?
Yes.
Representative Schertz?
Yes.
Representative Gannon? Representative Mathias?
No.
Representative Rubel?
No.
Motion carries 8-7.
Oh Lord.
Further discussion, Representative Alfieri.
A lot of money.
Mr. Chairman, I
spent
move
on
to send
stuff
HCR
like
10
this.
to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
You know, these kind of nonsense bills,
Discussion on the motion.
and this is coming from out of
Representative
state.
Ehart.
And Idaho is.
Thank you, Mr.
seems
Chairman.
to have
I
these
guess I'll go
screwballs.
first. And I'm going to probably share a few more thoughts than I originally would. I hope my colleagues would listen to this.
They repealed term
but
limits, 8-year
the
term
first thought
limits
that
in
I'd like to share
2002.
Is,
And then
as
they
we
have
all know, our document is
$100,000 that
sacred.
comes in to elect.
The Constitution is sacred.
You know, these to pay for
Maybe I
these
will,
guys for the campaigns.
File to receive
Boyle's
those
been there
2,000
for
pages.
28
But right
years.
now, the people of the United States look to this.
I can say
A
it.
couple of things I can guarantee you. If we hold a convention, the sacredness
Oh,
of the
yeah,
original
we gotta have a
Constitution will no
convention.
longer be as
Where's
sacred
the
as
money
right
gonna
now.
come
I
from?
promise you that will be true.
Why
We will look
do
to
you
another
want to take this
convention
red herring?
For words and for the future.
You know,
The other thing I'll
education
promise
needs
you,
money. This is
and I know
money.
I can make this promise, if we have a convention, it will be tied up in
And
the
so
courts.
yeah.
My prediction is if we have a convention, there will be of necessity a second convention, probably held within 2 years,
Yeah,
to
you
fix
got
the
money?
problems that we saw in the first convention. And yet there'll be words. Everything will be words. We're not marching there with an army. They will be words.
And lawyers
We have
will make
words in this
money.
document. These are important words. They're sacred words. And I do not believe that we'll come up with words that are any more sacred than those words. Another thing that I think, a lot of important points, but important points that are to me and that I've shared with some of you, and I think that
You
you
know, what
agree.
makes these people so smart? Is it because they
At the
sit up
time
there
of
and
our
they think they're
founders-
really smart?
Well, actually, let me go here.
And they're spending our
some of
money.
you know I go to Wall Builders.
They get
David Barton runs Wall Builders.
$229
Glenn
a
Beck
day,
goes there. David Barton has had at
plus
Wall
their
Builders
salary,
George
plus
Barna
free health care.
for the last couple of years. George
It's
Barna is a
equivalent to,
pollster,
12,
a major
12
pollster.
months of health care.
And one of the things he shared with us that I found fascinating is that surely
$12,000
that
a year,
cannot
probably
be
more
true.
now.
George Barna has said that in polling throughout the United States,
And of course, Hill
that
is a
there are only
lawyer, and he's got some
6% of the
crazy
United
bills.
States, or when I say United States, the people in America have a biblical worldview. Now
Uh-huh.
let that sink in.
Biblical.
Only 6%, he said that twice, have a biblical worldview. When our founders got together, they
Our
all
founders, yeah, we
had
got to
a
go back to the
biblical
founders
worldview. Some of it
270
differing
years ago.
in different places, but they had a biblical worldview. And that biblical worldview was one of the things that really drew them close together and helped them with, if you might say, a set principles on which to move forward. And that biblical worldview, those men, I believe that movement at the time, I of course, we're all sinners. I believe that we all believe that, but that biblical worldview, the Bible, they studied the Bible, Israel, what the people in Israel, that was a lot of what they did as they studied so many different governments. But that biblical worldview helped them. This was a spiritual movement. I believe that with all my heart. Doesn't matter whether we disagree, you can read their writings. It was very much a spiritual movement. And as I look at what's happening today, and Glenn Beck is an actual friend of mine, and I would like to read some of Glenn Beck's words that he said in September of 22. People said that Glenn changed his mind back. He did not. Glenn said, I've been a supporter of the Article 5 Convention of States. I have been a pretty big supporter, vocal supporter. I'm reversing that
And
today.
if you want to find
because
a
after some
real good
thought and
movie,
prayer, we
there
are
is a
not
good
that
movie that
people
exposes
to open up
him.
the sacred document.
And
We are
it's
not
called
that
The Loudest
people. That was a
Voice.
God-inspired document that was divinely written. You
He
can
lives
read
down
it
in,
from, I don't know
Weston,
how many different
Idaho.
founders' viewpoints. The very hand of
Down
God
in Franklin
was
County,
involved.
I think.
He went
Maybe
on
it's
to
Oneida.
say, I am not for opening up the Constitution anymore because we are not
And
that
that's
people
one of the
anymore.
problems.
When we are
We have
when we are
Fox
that
News,
people,
we got
I will be
Newsmax,
for
we
it
got
again.
Beck.
When we've demonstrated our humility and our obedience to God,
was saying
and
that
I'm
De
afraid it's
Wormer,
going to take a
veteran,
massive beat down of our
whatever it's
country to get to that
called,
place, then I'll be
is,
for it again. Someday we'll
is
be
going
humble
to
enough
prevent you from
and
dying
we'll recognize God
from
that
COVID.
someday
Don't take those vaccines. Don't take a vaccination.
we will not be so arrogant.
You know,
when
I
we're
had
those
polio
people
when
are
I was
support
a
the
kid.
Convention of States.
And I
But
can tell you, the
but I would
Salk
draw my support,
vaccines
and I'm
have
sorry to say
probably
that is because of the fact that
prevented
this
me from
Constitution
having
is wholly
worse muscle
inadequate
problems than
for
I had.
anyone other than a religious and moral
And-
people.
and
We call
before
that from,
vaccines,
John Adams.
The average life
That we are
expectancy
not
was
those people.
49.
We should not stain this document. And so some of you,
So
my fellow
she
colleagues,
can
we've had
quote,
that
she can quote
conversation.
Glenn Beck. As far
Do
as
not
I'm
just vote for this
concerned,
because you want it to go away.
he's a Rush
Are we
Limbaugh
that people?
kind
I
of
will
guy. I
say
listened
this
to him
in
back
all
in
honesty.
Ohio.
If I thought I could send
he didn't sound very
Jordan
good because he
Redmonds
had two
and everybody would be a Jordan
bouts
Redmond,
of COVID back
and I
in
mean this sincerely, I probably
2022.
support that. We are not you. I don't even think I'm you. That's how much respect I have for you. But we are not that people, and I will
Yeah.
ask this committee.
I
to
think
please say no.
there, you can understand listening to the
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted
Mr.
to make
Hawkins.
a few comments. I spent a better part of a year proclaiming that I wouldn't be interested in this at all unless there was
Now this guy
the
is,
rules
I think,
were set
isn't he
up
a
in
school
place
teacher.
first for the delegates. And then lo and behold, they both showed up at the same time. And I was like, now what? So, but what I found a little surprising as I dug in, and I guess some states did it one way and some states did it another, that it is framed in a concurrent resolution and not legislation. This is not law. So that troubled me a little bit, that we didn't just put a bill through and make it a law, how the delegates would be governed. And then I began to dig a little deeper, and there does seem to be a lot of confusion over who gets to pick and how this is going to happen, because as I don't know who else hasn't looked at it. I've had it on my screen for a half an hour now. It's a very short statement in our Constitution. This Article 5, this thing that we know that our founders put there. So as I became a little bit more disillusioned with what I might have thought I'd done, I started to reach out, and I heard somebody, and I don't remember who it was. Somebody said on behalf of 105 million people in Idaho. Is that did anybody else hear that? Was I hearing things? Yeah, so that was heard. So we're 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds are demanding a constitutional convention. We only have 2-point-something million people in the entire state, and that's every man, woman, and child, including infants. But I started to call around in the areas. I have 5 counties, District 2, Clearwater, Benewah, Shoshone, part of Kootenai County, part of Bonner County. I began to call around, and I found out that in my district alone, the central committees that don't have a resolution against Article 5 are in the process of passing one, and are not, that it isn't that it didn't pass, they just haven't had their meeting yet. And it was like, well, we're going to do it on Tuesday. And I told them that, well, I can't wait till Tuesday, but they were all confident that their central committees were behind this. And I spoke to other people in the area. So I'm not seeing this overwhelming support in my district for this action. And because of that, I'm just going to have to remain a no.
Representative Handy.
For some discussion, please. I have been back and forth on this thing so many times that I can't even keep track of it. And I'm a very pragmatic person. And at the end of the day, I guess I came to pragmatism is we have done nothing and nothing has happened. And we're looking at debt that is so huge now. I mean, if you can imagine if your personal debt was that and you were trying to pay just the interest, you would succumb in a heartbeat. So we're not succumbing because we're printing more money and everyone's complaining about inflation. So my feeling is nothing ventured, nothing gained. And there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of unknowns. I'll be the first to admit that, I'm not going to jump up and down and be real excited about what's going to happen. But I do believe that states and people in states can watch this process. We didn't have any of those dangers in the 1990s, but we can watch this process. And if it gets out of line, I think there's at least half of the states in the country would say, "Hey, this is not what we signed up for." It's not like we signed this thing and then the federal government's going to shove something down our throat. We're still the states, and we still have our rights, and we still have authority, and we still have numbers, and we still have lots of power on our side. So, and I feel very strongly about the Constitution as well. And I've been in lots of countries. My wife and I love to travel. We have it so good, and it's because of our Constitution and the way we live. And I've seen lots of constitutions, lots of countries that have tried to redo their constitution and failed miserably. But we will fail miserably if we don't do something with debt. And we will fail miserably if we don't address career politicians, 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, it's amazing. I've been here 3 years, and it's an eternity. I don't know what it would be like to be in Washington for all those years. So my feeling is, and my vote will be cast just because what we've done is not working, and I'm willing to take a risk to try something else. Thank you.
Representative Rubel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to speak against the motion. I would not say that we are in the dire circumstances that I'm hearing described today. We have the greatest nation on earth. We have the longest standing constitution on earth. These are not nothing. These are incredible achievements. And to risk throwing that away, I agree. The debt is bad. We should do something about that. But I think jeopardizing the very foundation of our nation is going too far to address a problem that can be addressed within our current structures. Our Constitution, the thing that makes it so amazing is the universal buy-in. We live in such a divided time. People can barely agree on what color the sky is. I mean, nobody agrees on anything. The only thing that everybody from Bernie Sanders to Steve Bannon can agree on is that we love our Constitution. This is something, and I couldn't agree more with Representative Ehart, this is something that will be lost. No question. I mean, we may come out with new amendments, et cetera, but they will not have the kind of buy-in that our current Constitution has. We might have a situation where some majority can ram something down the minority's throat, and then the minority will be bitter forever and looking for a way to reverse that. That is not a healthy way to approach a constitutional drafting process. That is not what we have right now. We have a sacred document that everybody in America believes in. This is so risky. Now, you'll hear some people say, "Oh, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about here." They will say with perfect confidence, there is no chance of a runaway convention. There is no chance of the ratification rules being changed. Nothing to worry about here. But let me tell you, you will find equally credentialed people on the other side including Supreme Court justices, to say absolutely there's a risk of a runaway convention. Absolutely they could change the ratification requirement. We don't know what the heck will happen when we turn these people, of whom we have no idea how they will be selected or what their mandate will be. We do not know what will happen when we turn them loose and what kind of constitution we will emerge with. The Constitution is too sacred to play Russian roulette with. And the one thing that we can be sure, again, you'll have people say no risk here. You'll hear people say absolutely no. There is risk. There is uncertainty. There is no question. There are enough highly credentialed people on both sides of this equation that the one certain thing is that there is uncertainty and risk. I think that as long as we have our Constitution, we have the tools to solve our problem. We have the tools to solve the debt. We have the tools to solve term limits. We have the tools to solve it all, as long as we have this beautiful, amazing Constitution that we all believe in. Without that, we have nothing. Without that, we face the total disintegration of our nation and whatever unity we have left. And are there some amendments that make sense? Sure, maybe. I think we should look at those and go through the traditional amendment process if that's what we want, where we can actually see the darn thing on paper in black and white, see the exact language, and decide if we want that or not. If we want a balanced budget amendment, let's put it in front of us in black and white where we all get to vote on it and see what we're voting on. Not where we're turning a bunch of people loose in a room. We don't know who. We don't know if any of us will have any say on that. And without any known guardrails around what process they undertake to rewrite our Constitution. That is terrifying, and I think, again, our Constitution's too precious. We need to stop this today, now. So I hope you will give this bill a no.
Representative Pohanka.
Mr. Chair, I tell you, this last week I've gotten, I don't know how many emails, maybe hundreds, for and opposed to it. And it's just like, through my mind and my heart, I'm thinking, what's going to be the best? And I look at our debt, the debt, and we're $36.5 trillion in debt per citizen, $107,000, debt per taxpayer is $323,000. So all of us that pay taxes, if we could all write a check right now for $323,000, we'd take care of this 36. And I do believe there's checks and balances that we have that we haven't used, and people need to be held accountable. Now, going back to Representative E. Hart, total respect for you, young lady. Appreciate all you're doing. And just like you said, the Constitution is sacred, and I worry about changing it. I really do, and it scares me. And just as my government teacher always said, that's like the Holy Grail, that's the Bible. And I will be a no on this vote. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of talk about the Constitution being sacred. It's sacred like America is. It's like this country is. This is divine. Our country is divine. And the Constitution is sacred. And if that's the case, what is the problem with Article 5? Because the founders put it in there for us to be able to revise it. If the government becomes tyrannical, and I wish I had the quote in front of me from George Mason as to why Article 5 was enacted, but it basically says that should the government become tyrannical, the government will never change itself. It is up to the people, it is up to the states, which empower and create the government, to do something about it. That's where we are now, folks. We are in trouble. Now we have had a very fortunate election, and there are some great changes being made. But it isn't always going to be that way. Things will change. The pendulum will swing the other way. And 5 or 10 years from now, we'll be sitting here. Well, some of you, I probably won't be. We'll be sitting here saying, oh my gosh, what do we do now? This tool is to be used by the states to correct what the federal government is doing. It is to be used to rein in the spending that is out of control, that will do terrible things in the future to our grandchildren, to my grandchildren. We talk about this not being the right time and that we're not the right people. I don't agree with that. It is the right time. We do have the right people. My friend Jordan Redmond, Representative Ehart, Representative Hawkins, Representative Mathias, I would be more than happy to see them go to a Article 5 convention. I would trust them with my country, because when we step into this house, we do sacred work. We know it. We feel it. This isn't going to the grocery store and picking something off the shelf because, yeah, it's good enough. No, we give a lot of thought to what we do. And that's what will happen in an Article 5 convention. What's likely to happen? It probably will result in no amendments being enacted. But what will happen is that the federal government will finally realize that the states are not just here to be stepped on and to have money thrown at us to say, do this and do it the way I want you to do it. The federal government will realize that it is the states that create this government,
about
that the states create this country.
Be one of the guys,
and that political act alone may be the most important thing that happens
Go to hotels.
with an Article 5 convention. So I urge your yes vote.
Taxpayers that pay for that. Me and you and everybody else.
Representative Schertz, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have so many passionate constituents on this issue, and many of them are here with us today. And on both sides of the issue, very conservative people who have a tremendous love for our Constitution and our country, just as I know everyone on this committee has as well. But the question that has been in my mind, and I know it's been sparked by so much of the conversation we had today, if you believe the Constitution is a divine document, which I agree, 100% agree with, then why is this in here if not to use? Why is this in here if not for a time such as this, right now, today? Why? Why? And as much conversation as I've had about this, I can't come to a thought except for when the people's voices need to be heard, that is there to be heard. And we're in a world of hurt. I still remember when I was 8 years old and my dad was talking to me at his kitchen table about the national debt. And I'm like, what is the heck is a national debt? But he was worried about it then. And it's only gotten worse and worse and worse. How do we stop it? How do we stop it? The citizens of our state can't stop it, but we can. This is such a big issue for us. You know, I was really trying to wrap my head around how do we stop this runaway convention? I think I'm satisfied with many of the answers. The fact that 3/4 of the states, either by convention or by the legislature, have to come. That gives me great assurance in what is going on. The bottom line is, though, this whole body, not just this committee, this whole body deserves to hear this issue. They do. Send it to the committee, send it to the floor, allow them to hear this issue and allow them to cast their vote. This is too big of an issue. This whole body deserves to hear it. So with that, I will vote yes. I urge you to vote yes and send this to the floor. Thank you.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as I'm listening to the arguments back and forth, I can't help but think that there are things that we can actually do, and that in a way, if you just say, well, we're doing these convention states and this is going to solve the problem, now we don't have to worry anymore and we can go back to our ways. But spending and borrowing is not just has creeped up even in our own state legislature. I remember 30 years ago when I served in this legislature and bonding was proposed and it was rejected. That legislature did not want to borrow. They didn't believe in borrowing money for almost anything. And now, what do? Last year we borrow $1 billion in bonding, authorize $1 billion in borrowing for school buildings because that's the way we want to finance it. We borrow $1 billion for roads because that's the way we're financing it. The spending and borrowing is happening here at this legislature. And there is something you can do to control or walk the walk, so to speak.
Another thing is we've accepted all this ARPA money. Now, we're all complaining about the federal deficit. I would challenge people to look at where the ARPA money is being spent as to whether it's really necessary or it's going to provide any kind of real benefit. And I'll just give you one example that I've been talking about for 2 years is the Anderson Ranch raise, which started out at 80 million, is now costing 125 million. And guess what? It's only going to hold water 38% of the time, and it's only going to hold about 27, it would be an average of 8,000 acre feet a year. So if we don't look at some of our own spending and this federal money that we're always accepting, then we're in a situation where we're just kind of saying, well, we're going to vote for this today. We've done our, or some are saying, we'll vote for this today and we've done our job, and it'll get fixed year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, and so don't worry about it. I think there are things we can do today that would help the situation.
See no further red lights. Oh, there's one more. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to share some thoughts. I've heard we need power in the states. We need to be heard from the states. We can be heard. We can be powerful if we'd be courageous. If we would turn down ARPA money. If we would say, federal government, we don't want your money for education because it's not your delegated authority. We don't want you involved in education. Everyone wants a quick fix, and I understand. We all know this has been lobbied heavily, and the citizens are frustrated. I think some of that frustration is they want a quick fix. They just want government to get better. But the problem is we have allowed our schools to teach communism, pretty much, and people don't know how to engage in government. They don't know how to engage in government anymore. They don't even understand. I get calls from other districts that want me to vote a certain way, and they don't understand. I do not represent them. I had someone tell me last week that I should listen to the governor because I work for him. And I was like, no, I don't work for him. So I guess everyone wants a quick fix. And I would say we're at a time in history. I mean, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I'd say we were heading into a civil war. North Idaho thought that. A lot of people in North Idaho thought that. I see opportunity. I don't think we're headed into a civil war over the next year or so. I see opportunity for change. I see opportunity to see where we're at. What I don't want is I don't want a confusing system, and I know everyone's got an idea on how this is going to roll out. Some people say the delegates are coming here, coming there, and we can get lost in the weeds all day long. But I don't think anyone knows, and I think the last thing we need right now in this country is confusion, distraction. I just think that the timing is not right for this. I do not believe this is a fix because I believe we have the fix right here in our state. And so I'm encouraging you. This is a sacred document. It is something that has kept us together for a long time. And when we start opening that up and we think we're going to get something out of it, well, we're Idaho. I mean, we're going to be outnumbered by the big states, I'm pretty sure, depending on how the delegates are picked. We don't know how the delegates are picked. There's just too many questions. I'm not saying it's not a tool. I'm not saying it's not a tool we could use at some point. I just think the timing now is not what I think is the best for Idaho and where we're headed. And I think if you look across the country in for states leading, we are there with deregulation. We are getting a hold of some of our spending. And I think now with what's going on at the national level, there is an opportunity for us to start turning down some of this federal fund and starting to lead for the rest of this nation on what we can do as a state. And so for those reasons, I'm going to be a no to send this to the floor.
Representative Pahanka.
So, Mr. Chair, and listening to Representative Ehart and Representative Schertz, I'd like to make a motion to send to the floor without a recommendation.
That'd be a substitute motion to send to the floor without recommendation, correct? Okay, Representative Matthias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow something that Representative Hawkins said in the last few meetings, that maybe watching House Concurrent Resolution 9 move through the process would bring some of us comfort, and that we hold off on House Concurrent Resolution 10. So I'd make an amended substitute motion to hold House Concurrent Resolution 10 at the call of the chair.
If you would correct that to a date certain, that would be a more correct motion on an odd day.
Mr. Chairman, I make an amended substitute motion to hold House Concurrent Resolution 10 in committee on a date certain, being Friday, February 21st.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Properly, and we're going to do a roll call vote. Properly before the committee is an amended substitute motion to hold HCR 10 until Friday, February 21st.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I guess quickly to speak to that motion, since we have three motions here, I'd prefer to have just voted it down. I know that, the committee, we've been tasked with doing the work. But we've got two motions to get back to the original motion to say no. So I don't think it's fair to our colleagues to send it to the floor when we're the ones who've been tasked and asked to do the work if we feel strongly that way. So I suppose on the third, I'll support it, but I hate to kick it down the road. That just what we're doing by doing that is taking an issue that we've just dealt with right now and prolonging it. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on this from the committee. I'd be very curious to hear.
Looks like Representative Hawkins has some thoughts.
I thought we were going to vote.
Yeah, I have a comment on it.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be a yes on holding it in committee, because otherwise it sounds like some people want to vote for it on the floor, and then so I'm going to be a yes.
Seeing no further red lights.
Well then, Mr. Chairman,
One more.
I'm going to be a yes too then.
All right. When Nancy starts the voting, please turn your mics on.
Could you repeat?
And as a reminder, the motion is an amended substitute motion to hold HCR 10 until Friday, February 21st in committee.
Chairman Skog.
No.
Vice Chair Alfieri.
No.
Representative Scott.
Yes.
Representative Ehart.
Yes.
Representative Erickson.
No.
Representative Garner.
No.
Representative Handy.
No.
Representative Hawkins.
Yes.
Representative Hill.
No.
Representative Hostetler.
Yes.
Representative Pohanka.
No.
Representative Schertz.
No.
Representative Gannon.
Yes.
Representative Matthias. Yes. Representative Rubel.
Yes.
Motion fails 7-8. Next up is a substitute motion to send to the floor without recommendation.
Chairman Skog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri,
No.
Representative Scott,
No.
Representative Ehart,
No.
Representative Erickson,
Yes.
Representative Garner,
Yes.
Representative Handy,
Yes.
Representative Hawkins,
No.
Representative Hill,
No.
Representative Hostetler,
No.
Representative Pohanka,
Yes.
Representative Schertz,
Yes.
Representative Gannon,
No.
Representative Matthias,
No.
Representative Rubel,
No.
Motion fails 6-9. I need to look at my Masons since we're going to go at ease.
What does this mean? They don't want to bring it out of the committee. And that's a good thing.
Committee is back in session. Thank you for that at ease. I just had to check some procedural matters, make sure I'm going the right direction. Properly before the committee is the original motion to send HJR 10 to the floor with a do pass recommendation. We will do a roll call vote.
Chairman Skog.
Yes.
Vice Chair Alfieri.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
No.
Representative Ehart.
No.
Representative Erickson.
Yes.
Representative Garner.
Yes.
Representative Handy.
Yes.
Representative Hawkins.
No.
Representative Hill.
Yes.
Representative Hostetler.
No.
Representative Pohanka.
Yes.
Representative Schertz.
Yes.
Representative Gannon. Representative Matthias.
No.
Representative Rubel.
Motion carries 8-7. That concludes our work for today.
That's nonsense. Did you see what happened? I hope everybody watches this because you're going to learn a lot about your representatives. This is incredible. This is a red herring. This takes up time. This is going to cost the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars. And it's incredible.